In this video, we are going to discuss reactivity and the arousal curve. Most owners think that reactivity only has to do with aggression and aggressive dogs, and most will get a little bit offended, even subconsciously, if you as the trainer mention that your dog might be reactive. But I want you to keep in mind as we talk about reactivity, it can be any one of these emotional extremes. It can be fear, it can be anxiety, it can be aggressive, it can be happiness, and it can be just impulsive. And so if we get a dog that is overly friendly, gets so excited to go say hi to another dog from across the street that it starts barking and yelping and pulling on the leash, it is the same reactivity as a fear reactive dog or an aggression reactivity case. It is all based on that extreme emotion that is a little bit irrational in that moment that causes that severe physical reaction from your dog. And that leads us kind of down to the arousal curve. So every dog suffers from this to some degree, whether you have, a dog like mine, a little Vizsla named Rooster, who does not get overly reactive but still gets excited and impulsive when he meets new people. This is what happens with dogs in general. Even if you have a very well-mannered emotional support or service dog, when they are allowed the freedom to go meet someone new, they get excited a little bit. But the difference is some dogs' arousal curves are very, very subtle, very slow inclines, and some of them look like a complete skyscraper where it goes straight up from 0 to 100 within a couple seconds. So for this arousal curve, we're just going to demonstrate a middle of the road dog. And remember, it can be any one of these emotions. But when we have a trigger over here, and we're walking from this direction, let's say, getting closer to the trigger, our dog's mental baseline, because of all the work we're doing, is staying down here pretty low. But at some point, as we get closer to that specific trigger, whatever it is, people, animals, other dogs, noises, vehicles, it could be anything. As we get closer to that trigger, your dog will start to notice that trigger through one of their senses, whether that's sound, smell, usually sight. But once they start to notice that trigger, you will see a body language change. And it might be subtle. It might be the straightening of the back, tightening of the spine, the hair getting a little bit stiffer, your dog starting to pivot towards that, even slightly at a couple angles from that distance, hackles going up, ears pinpointing, them indicating that they see the trigger and they're now aware of it. As we continue closer to that trigger, your dog now starts to elevate a little bit and their mental state starts to angle up. And that might be indicative by dogs whining, dogs pulling slightly harder on the leash, as we call it, that three-tone missile lock, where the ears pinpoint fully forward, they focus on that trigger coming, and their body completely turns and locks on and doesn't disengage. And then if you have a very reactive dog, at a certain point, getting closer to the trigger, it is going to skyrocket and you're going to get the full-on reactivity. And that is going to be, for fear and aggression cases, the really loud barking, the lunging, the snapping, the pulling the owner on the leash. And then same for any of these other emotions. You're going to get, potentially that dog barking and running away. Or for an overly excited dog, you're going to get barking, pulling, jumping towards that person. But it can be confused with aggression sometimes because it is just so much energy pulling towards that trigger. But it happens very, very quickly and escalates very rapidly. Now, at each one of these points, there were little tiny changes of behavior along the arousal curve before we get up to this full-blown reactive moment way up here at the climax. And so as you get better at this and as you watch the videos, you should see your trainer start to point out the different body language changes in your dog before we get the full-on reactivity. The key with this is to keep your dog down here to where we might have a little spike, but we're able to keep it down. And then if we get closer, we get a little spike, but we're able to keep it down. And then as we get closer to the trigger, we might have little tiny humps but we're more or less able to stay very baseline. And the reason that we're able to do that is because whenever we have these little peaks, we're able to see it and we're able to interdict and give your dog an obedience command, change directions, practice some kind of a protocol that keeps your dog engaged with us and keeps them from fully locking on and reacting to those distractions. So in those moments, these are like our crisis points. When your dog's starting to approach a crisis point, it is your trainer's job and your job to notice the signs, see them happening, and then shut them down before they fully escalate. And if you're able to do that, then you can manage reactivity. At certain points, I'm sure you'll miss something and you'll find yourself at the very tip top of this. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't get our dog to come back down. It's just going to take a lot longer to come back down once we've fully gone through that hit that reactive point, that peak after our crisis point. So using our obedience at these crisis points is what we're going to do to try and keep the arousal very minimal throughout, no matter what trigger it is, how close the trigger is, and how intense the trigger is to our dog. So keep in mind, ask your trainer to show you your dog's crisis points and what they look like, and then we're going to practice that when we do the training and try to set that up so that way you can practice resetting your dog and keeping them calm instead of allowing them to become super reactive.